go ahead and begin. We'll ask the clerk to announce the meeting and call the roll.
A special session is being held on Thursday, March 31st, 2016 at 5 o'clock p.m. in the 5th floor conference room for a presentation from the Wyandotte Mental Health. Immediately following, the commission will recess from the 5th floor conference room to the 9th floor conference room for an executive session for litigation update and labor negotiations, and reconvene to the commission chambers lobby at 7 o'clock p.m. for a planning and zoning and full commission meeting. Roll call. Walters.
Here.
Philbrook.
Here.
Bynum.
Here.
Walker.
Here.
Townsend.
Here.
McKiernan.
Here.
Mugia.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Kane. Markley. Holland.
Here. So I'm going to recuse myself and turn the meeting over to Commissioner Walker as Mayor Pro Tem to lead this meeting. As many of you know, my wife works for Wyandotte Inc., the parent company, and so I'm going to be stepping out of the meeting. We are having this meeting. I think Wyandotte Inc. was originally going to meet individually with commissioners, and Commissioner Murguia asked that we have a special session instead. So we are here tonight to honor that request. So I'm going to step out, and I will meet up with the commission upstairs on the 6th floor, on the 9th floor for the 6 o'clock, and then I'll be downstairs for the 7 o'clock. But Commissioner Walker, thank you.
Okay. All right. County Administrator Bach, would you present the discussion?
Certainly. Tonight's discussion is really, a lot of focus comes to Wyandotte Mental Health, which all of you are aware is the mental health service provider that we fund. We fund it as a county, as an organization for many years. The overall company over this is Wyandotte Inc. So questions that come about the organization operating. So we've asked Mr. Kallstrom to come in today and really kind of give us an overview of all their operations, spend more time focusing on those that we fund into, which is Wyandotte Mental Health, but to come and present tonight. So this is what we have lined up, and with that I'll turn it over to Randy and let you go from there.
So thank you, Mr. Bach. I'd like to thank the Commission for the opportunity to be here. I hope you will find this informative, if not entertaining. But I think this is helpful information for the Commission to be aware of about what we do as the designated community mental health center for Wyandotte County. My presentation tonight will cover a brief history of the organization and the development of the community mental health centers across the nation, explain a little bit about the Wyandotte Inc. family of agencies and our corporate structure, talk a little bit about the numbers and the services that we provide, the funding, where we are today in terms of the mental health services, what we provide in return on the investment that we have, and then lastly, an update on RSI, the Crisis Stabilization Center. To fast forward from 1953, the roots of the organization date back to that year when we were incorporated as the Wyandotte County Child Guidance Center. Then in the 1960s and 1970s, we were introduced into adult services, and the name was changed to Wyandotte Mental Health Center. That name continued to exist until about 15 years ago when it was changed to Wyandotte Center for Community Behavioral Health Care, which we refer to as Wyandotte Center because the prior name's too long to say every time. And then in 2010, it was restructured under the umbrella organization of Wyandotte Inc. with Wyandotte Center, PACES, Kim Wilson Housing, and then in 2014, RSI was added to the family of organizations. I want to take a minute and talk about the development of the community mental health center system across the nation and across the state of Kansas. In 1963, President Kennedy signed the Community Mental Health Center Act. This was really a part or a step in the deinstitutionalization of those that were inflicted with mental health disorders. Prior to that, institutionalization in large psychiatric hospitals or facilities was really the norm for folks that could not be treated safely in the community. We had pretty rudimentary medications back in those days, but there were no community supports for those individuals with severe mental illness. The act signed by President Kennedy created community mental health centers across the nation. Kansas Statute Chapter 39 establishes in this state the requirement for community mental health centers and outlines those services that are required under statute for each CMHC to provide. It was in the mid-1960s that Wyandotte Mental Health Center became designated by the Wyandotte County Commission as the county's community mental health center. And I will talk tonight about what that means. One of the things that I explain to every new employee orientation group that we have is that yes, we are a mental health organization. We provide psychiatric services and other mental health services to all of those individuals, adults, children, and family that walk in our door, but we really view the community as one of our clients as well. And I think you will see the illustration of the significance of that as I move forward with the presentation. In Kansas, there are 26 community mental health centers. Each community mental health center has a catchment area. We are Wyandotte County, and only Wyandotte County. High Plains Mental Health Center on the western side covers a quarter of the geographic area of Kansas. So they cover a large expansion and about 15 people. These are structured in very different ways. There are two CMHCs that are actually county agencies. That is Johnson County Mental Health Center, and in Sedgwick County, it's ComCare in the Wichita area. Others are quasi-government agencies, so there is some formal relationship, but they're not government entities. Most community mental health centers in Kansas are self-standing nonprofits that are partially funded by the county and designated by the county as their CMHC, and that is where Wyandotte Center falls. We are one, we are five. In 2010, Wyandotte Inc. was incorporated as a parent or holding company to provide the backroom services for the other organizations. So backroom functions such as human resources, accounting, those types of things. And Wyandotte Center continued to be the CMHC of record. It currently is the mental health center providing services to adults, but our children's program was rolled out from underneath the Wyandotte Center as PACES, which once upon a time stood for Parent and Adolescent Child Empowerment Services, but was shortened to PACES as it was incorporated. And the idea with that was to really give our children's services a separate identity. Wyandotte Mental Health Center, Wyandotte Center was known throughout the community for a variety of reasons. If you worked in the adult arena in some fashion, you were familiar with that as adult services. If you were in the school district, you probably knew Wyandotte Center for the children's services, but there was not a unique branding to our children's programming, and we thought it would be helpful to the organization and also helpful to the community to have an organization that was a child-serving mental health center that spoke specifically to that younger population and families. Kim Wilson Housing was also brought into the umbrella in 2010. Kim Wilson Housing is a housing corporation that it doesn't provide housing, it doesn't own housing, but it helps people who are homeless and experiencing mental illness find housing. So they develops funding for housing alternatives. It is a leader in the community in housing services and services to prevent or help people who are homeless. And then again in 2014, RSI, which is our Crisis Stabilization Center, which I will go into much greater detail here in just a few minutes. The overarching vision of Wyandotte Inc. is healthy minds, healthy lives, and a thriving community. And the concept behind that is we are the mental health center, and so we are focused on helping people develop a healthy mind, a healthy brain. We know now that most mental illnesses are organic brain disorders, and developing a healthy mind can be done. And in many, many cases, recovery is experienced. But we've expanded that to really incorporating an integrated health care model of really looking at the whole person and knowing that mental health is often impacted by physical health and vice versa. But we believe that we can do our part as a community mental health center by helping address the mental health needs of the community and helping address the physical health care of our clients to help this community thrive. The values adopted by our board of directors this last fall is compassion, that we work in a very compassionate way, both with our clients, with the community, and with each other. Excellence, that we don't want to provide okay services. We want to exceed the expectations of our clients and exceed the expectations of our community partners and the community as a whole. Positivity, that we approach our work in a positive spirit and a can-do, and a problem-solving approach, that if there are barriers to meeting the needs of someone we're working with, that we work in a positive way to try and find solutions to those barriers. And innovation, that we identify and create new opportunities to better serve our community. And finally, stewardship, that we have limited resources, we have many resources, but we have to use them very carefully and very wisely. In fiscal year 15, and we operate on a fiscal year of July 1 through June 30th, so the date I will show you is from that period of time. But across the 5 agencies, we have 550 employees. In fiscal year 15, Wyandotte Center served almost 7,000 adults, and PACES served nearly 4,000 children and youth and their families. RSI, which came into existence again in April 14, since then has served nearly 2,000 individual unduplicated consumers. And in 2015, Kim Wilson Housing prevented almost 200 Wyandotte County citizens from being evicted and homeless in Wyandotte County. The funding, our FY15 budget was close to $36 million. 32% of that was from government grants. Most of that money is earmarked towards specific services. That includes a couple homeless grants that we have that goes to fund specific staff attached to those homeless programs. Roughly 9% of the grants that we receive from the state and the allotment from the Unified Government Commission is about 9%. Those funds, the state funds that we receive and the government grants from the commission here equals about $3.2 million. Those dollars are all allocated to serve the uninsured, and I'll talk more about the number of uninsured that we see every year. But those dollars all go to Wyandotte Center, and they all go specifically to staff that we hire to serve people who are uninsured. Any administrative cost, my salary, any administrative salary, any utility, any rent, any mortgage payments, those come from the fee-for-services that we are able to develop through our fee-for-service business, primarily with Medicaid, which is 62% of the services and the revenue that we produce. In FY15, 84% of all dollars that we receive go directly back into funding programs and services. 16% covers administration costs, including salaries, including overhead, including mortgages, etc. We think that's a pretty good number to look at. There's a lot of research out there that if you are in the 20 to 25% as a nonprofit in administrative cost and overhead, that's pretty good. We try to invest back into our services as much as we possibly can. So as a community mental health center, our core mission is that we are the safety net for anyone in the county who is experiencing a mental health need, whether that's a mental health crisis, whether they have severe mental illness, whether or not they are having family discord, if a parent is having difficulty in raising their child, we are there to help them. And one of the hallmarks of a community mental health center, and this is the language directly in our contract with the state, is that we provide all services necessary regardless of their ability to pay. In 2012, the Greater Kansas City Healthcare Foundation did a study and found that when you take into consideration the indirect costs, the loss of production from absenteeism due to mental illness, the poverty rates from people with mental illness, the inability of people with severe mental illness to find employment, etc., that the total cost loss is about $64 million with about a year, with about 10% of that, or $6.4 million, being in direct cost to the community. That would include bookings into jail, hospitalizations, mental health services, etc. According to the recent information that was distributed, 22% of the Wyandotte County residents are uninsured, and 34% of all the consumers that Wyandotte Center PACES provide treatment to are uninsured, meaning they have no way of paying for the services that we provide. We do have a sliding scale fee, but we collect very little of that because we actually have determined that it costs more to actually try and pursue payment than not. But that's an important figure, because if you recall, 9% of the revenue that we receive on an annual basis goes to provide all funding for the uninsured, but yet 34% of the people we see don't have any way of paying for their services. As the Community Mental Health Center, and with this information, I'm speaking both for adults and for kids, so for Wyandotte Center and for PACES, we provide a very robust and array of mental health services. Everything from your traditional outpatient therapy or counseling to psychiatric services, again, regardless of if they have a pay source, to more intensive what's called rehab service or community support services. And that includes case management services, attendant care services, other support services, including crisis services, including vocational services. These are services that are aimed for those adults with severe mental illness and for children with severe emotional disorders. These are, most of our staff, most of the services we provide are actually provided in the community. We have very close working relationships with the schools, with the jails, with housing authority. We have strategic partners throughout the community to really look at what is it going to take to help these individuals become stable, stay out of the hospital, stay out of the state hospital, and stay out of jail. These are services in statute that we are required to provide. At any given time, we are serving about 1,000 adults with severe mental illness who are receiving very intensive community supports, and about 1,000 children with severe emotional disorders who also are receiving very intensive community-based services. And we do much more than that. Again, we look at ourselves as the community mental health center, and the community has many needs. And we have made it our mission not only to serve those individuals that come in our door, but to find gaps in the community, and if we can help, we try to do that. One of those gaps is serving the homeless. The Frank Williams Housing Resource Center was launched about 5 years ago. It provides on a walk-in basis laundry, showering services, coffee, access to computers. And you may recall that on February 12th, those services were closed due to the loss of funding in other parts of the organization that had gone to underwrite all of those services. We never received any additional funds to provide that care. And I'm very pleased to share with you tonight that next Tuesday, April 5th, with the incredible support of one particular donor and other donors who have outreached us in response to the closing of Frank Williams at 9 a.m. next Tuesday, we will reopen the services at Frank Williams, and certainly invite each of you to attend if you are able to. But we are very pleased that the community has helped respond to this, and look forward to continuing to provide those services through other continued philanthropic donations and other grants and foundational supports. We also have 2 federal grants that are aimed to outreach those folks in the community who are homeless and experiencing severe mental illness. These grants not only help fund the psychiatric or mental health services, but also are aimed to help these individuals find housing and become stable in their housing. And most of those move into what we refer to as supportive housing services, where we have mental health staff on site to help them wherever and whenever that they are experiencing a need, to help them stay in their home. We also have participated as navigators for the Accountable Care Act and with the Enroll Wyandotte initiative. Our supported employment has set not only state records but national records. Over 70% of our adults with severe and persistent mental illness who seek a job, we are able to help find employment. And those are jobs in Wyandotte County. And just in the most recent months, we've had 6 of our consumers who have obtained jobs who were identified or selected as employees of the month at their employer. So not only are they finding jobs, but they're being highly successful in those jobs. And the SOAR program is a national recognized program to help individuals who are uninsured, who might qualify for disability services, to access the resources that they're needing in order to find stability in their life. The justice system is a key component of what we do. Again, in the 2012 Greater Kansas City Healthcare Foundation report, they identified around 1,100 individuals who are booked into the Wyandotte County Jail primarily for the reason of their mental illness, not for any other crimes that they have committed. In response, not just in that report, but going back 4 or 5 years ago, we started a very targeted initiative to help address individuals with mental illness who are ending up in jail for really no other reason, including the CIT training. Over 350 Wyandotte County law enforcement officers, sheriffs, deputies, etc., have received training in a model based out of Memphis over 20 years ago called Crisis Intervention Team. And it helps officers identify in the field when they are experiencing someone who is in a mental health crisis. Too often our officers and law enforcement officials are called out to scenes for people who are disrupting, who are dangerous to the community, danger to themselves or danger to others, primarily because of their mental health needs and their mental health crisis that they are experiencing. The CIT training helps officers identify that and gives them tools to help de-escalate the situation, but also then gives them resources to take them as alternative to booking them into jail. We also have a mobile crisis responder. This is a licensed, qualified mental health professional who goes out with CIT officers into the community in those situations where someone is in a mental health crisis. We do follow-up calls with those individuals and try to engage those folks into services and then into the help that they are needing. We also have a jail diversion specialist that is housed in the jail. They work with jail officials to identify anyone coming in who is booked that might be there for a mental health reason. They cross-reference them with our caseloads of folks that we're working with to help them be released from jail and into the appropriate services when that is appropriate. For kids and families, we have a number of programs that we have done over the years. One is the Exchange and Visitation Center. And this is a service that was started 8-9 years ago.
2009. I had my tummy tuck. That's how I remember.
Okay.
What? To be honest.
Would you like to say that?
No, I've never lied about that.
So in 2009, the courts reached out to any willing community partner to provide supervised visitation and monitored exchanges for those families mostly involved with the courts for domestic violence situations. At the time, children were being exchanged at McDonald's, where literally mom would drop them off on one side of McDonald's. They would walk through the building, out the other side of the restaurant, and get into the car with dad. I'm not sure what could possibly go wrong in that scenario. Visitation was happening actually in the courts. I believe we were the only community agency that stepped up.
Yes, you were.
And we've been providing that service ever since then. And this is not to our financial gain, but we are able to get some monies through fees charged to the parents through the courts for that, and then we have gone out and sought other grants and other funding to help underwrite those services. And then you may recall a couple years ago, I was before the commission requesting a donation from the land bank for a new children's emergency shelter. I want to thank the commission again for that very gracious gesture. From that, we built Roberts Place, which is our children's emergency shelter. Again, this was a service that after 2007, when the sheriff's office began operating the juvenile intake and assessment center, they found themselves in a position of being responsible for children who had been abused or neglected and removed from their home, and they were responsible for care for the next 72 hours until the court decided if the children should go home or not. And they were having to drive them as far away as Wichita and Junction City because there was no suitable place here in Wyandotte County. There was an RFI that went out through the Juvenile Corrections Advisory Board, or JCAB at the time, to provide emergency shelter. Again, PACES stepped up to the plate to provide that service, but it was inadequate. It wasn't enough. It was only 4 beds, and we couldn't keep sibling groups together. Worst case scenarios, children were being kept at the juvenile intake center and literally sleeping on a cot. I'm very pleased to share with you that we raised $1.1 million to build Roberts Place, named after Pete Sievenbergen's son, who was killed 2 years ago. You also may recall at the petition for a special use permit that there were some families that weren't real happy with the idea of this children's shelter being built in their backyard. And I just want to give you a brief update on that. Following that commission meeting, I went and met with the neighbors directly to the east of the children's shelter, and we sat on their back deck and we talked about what their concerns were. And their biggest concerns were 2 things. One is they bought the house because they liked the privacy that the wooded area, which was in the land that donated to us by the commission, was some of that was going to have to be cleared out to build the house, and they were going to lose that sense of privacy. So we asked them, if we built you a privacy fence and we landscaped in a very nice way your side of the fence, would that help you? And it did. They were very pleased with that idea. They actually became the eyes and ears for the building project as it was being built, and they would call our general contractor if they saw a suspicious car parked out in front. And we've developed a very good relationship with the neighbors. And to my knowledge, we've not had any complaints since we opened, with the exception of a neighbor in back who was experiencing water runoff into their backyard. And so we had the general contractors come back out and rework the water flow to be within code, but also to not run into the neighbor's backyard. So we did open in August, and since then it's just been an amazing experience to keep large sibling groups together, not have to turn away kids. And if you haven't had the chance to see the house, if you'd like to, I would love to show that off a little bit. But so I also mentioned some partnerships we have with the school districts, primarily and particularly the Kansas City, Kansas School District. We have school-based therapy. One of the things that we identified is that we were getting a lot of referrals from the school for folks in the Northeast area, but a lower percentage of families that would follow up with services. And so what we developed is a partnership with the schools, where we now go to those schools in the Northeast area, meet with the families in their homes or at the school where they are most comfortable, to try and break down those barriers in accessing mental health care for the children. Our First Steps Pre-K program, again, is in partnership with the school district to help kids be ready for kindergarten so that their emotional and behavioral disorders don't get in the way of their development. And then many years ago, about 15 years ago, Dr. Cindy Lane, who was then at that time the special ed director for the school district, and PACES, well, the Wyandotte Center at the time, developed the Wyandotte Academy, which is a specialized program targeting those children with really organic brain disorders that needed a very special therapeutic milieu in order to be successful in school. And then just a nice program that we have is Toys for Dots, where children in our care and their siblings, they get a Christmas present. This last Christmas, we provided gifts for about 1,500 kids that would not have otherwise received one. But my favorite part of that is that the gifts actually go to the parent, and then the parent can give that to them at Christmas time, so that it's not getting it from a mental health agency, it's from their parent. Housing is an intervention in and of itself. Kim Wilson Housing, again, 195 folks in Wyandotte County were not evicted into homelessness through their services, but there's also, through James Glenn and his staff, provide great leadership. The 1,400 Diplomas program is in conjunction with many community partners, including Avenue for Hope and the school district, and it's targeted towards helping those youth who are at risk of homelessness or are homeless to find safe housing. A next step in that endeavor is working with Donnelly College to help provide housing for the unaccompanied youth. These are older teens who don't have any family at all and are homeless, but we're working with the local colleges to open up the dorms that are not being used in order to provide housing for these students. Supportive services for veterans' families. Just last week we received 2 referrals for veterans in Wyandotte County who were homeless. Again, through Kim Wilson Housing, we work to help them find housing. And the 2016, the End Homelessness Initiative, is that by the end of this year, we will find a resolution to homeless issues in Wyandotte County. It's a long ways to go, but it's a great project. We also provide a lot of training to the community. Mental health first aid is nationally recognized as a model program, and this is delivered to community members who would like to have a better understanding about the signs and symptoms of mental illness and some tips on what to do with someone who is experiencing mental health needs. And then trauma-informed care is a way of really recognizing that many of the people that we see, many of the people who are homeless, many of the people in the jails have experienced extensive trauma in their life. That this is not a moral deficiency, these are damaged people. And we have conducted training with all of our staff in that model and provide that training with our community partners, including the school districts in Wyandotte County. RSI, Rainbow Services Inc., as it was incorporated, is a crisis stabilization center that is helping prevent needless jail bookings, needless state hospitalizations, and needless visits to the emergency room. Triage is one of those services, and the idea behind this is that this is a very law enforcement centric program. One of the components of this is that if a police officer in the field picks someone up for a mental health reason, disrupting, annoyance kinds of things, they're inebriated or they're not in a good place emotionally, that this is a one-stop shop where they can bring someone and within 10 minutes be back out on the street, as opposed to the time that it takes to book someone into the jail, or sometimes the up to 2, 3, 4 hours or more sitting in the emergency room until they can be processed in the emergency room. The sobering unit, I describe this now. Jason Hess, who's the executive director of Heartland Radak, who helps operate that program, I don't think he likes this analogy, but if you're familiar with Mayberry RFD and Otis would check himself into the jail when he was drunk, and when he sobered up the next day, he would let himself out. In a very rough way of describing that service, that's more or less what it does. It's a way of, again, instead of throwing somebody in the drunk tank, bring them to RSI. We'll help them get sobered up. We'll get them hooked up with community services that they're needing and follow-up care. The Crisis Observation Unit is a 23-hour unit to really help discern, is this someone who is in psychiatric distress? Is this someone who is chemically distressed? What level of care are they needing? And how do we get them stabilized and into the next appropriate place? If they need a little bit longer stabilization, we have our 10-day stabilization unit to help them get back into a good place. One of the key components of RSI that's a little bit different than other crisis centers across the state is the medical component, that we do have nursing care around the clock. We do have psychiatric services available around the clock. That adds to the cost of the program, but also adds significantly to the positive outcomes.
Randy, I'll just remind you, we have about 15 minutes left on this.
I was
portion of
going to
our session.
remind him as well, Mr. Bach, so
Okay.
that we have plenty of time for questioning by the commission.
Yes.
You're on page 10 or 11 of 17, so maybe you could summarize a little.
5 minutes?
Fine, thank you.
Is that good?
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, so thank you for the reminder. It is a unique collaborative with the community partners that you can see. Since we opened, nearly 2,000 clients have been seen. 92% of them are seen 3 times or less. Year 1, 60% of those who came to RSI were from Wyandotte County. 30% were from Johnson County. 10% were from other, primarily those are folks from the Missouri side of the state line who came into contact with law enforcement and were brought to RSI. In the second year, which is April through February, so not a full 12 months, 67% of those who came into RSI were from Wyandotte County. 35% of those brought to RSI this year are brought by law enforcement. 41% continue to be brought by themselves or by a family or friend. Do want to point out at the bottom graph there, this year, 345 from April through February were brought by the Kansas City, Kansas Police Department, and an additional 29 were brought by the Wyandotte County Sheriff's Department. If they had not come to RSI in year 1, 133 would have gone to jail, and in year 2, 91 would have gone to jail. Most of those folks would have gone into emergency rooms at the local hospitals, 38% in year 2. This is a quote from Chief Ziegler about the help that RSI has provided to the law enforcement staff and the police department. And this is a quote from Sheriff Ash. Again, one of the hallmarks of RSI is to help officers get someone to the appropriate place, drop them off, and be back out on the street in 10 minutes or less. Important to know is that 70% of the folks who come into RSI are uninsured. They don't have a way of paying for that service. Sustainability is something that we are working on. This was originated from a grant from KDAS, the Kansas Department of Aging and Disability Services. It's a $3.5 million a year grant. That grant will terminate in June of 2017. We also have a lease in the old Rainbow Mental Health Facility that will also terminate in June of 2017. And we are in the process of trying to secure long-term sustainable funding for that very needed program. It's also a changing environment in funding for mental health across the board. As we begin to move from a fee-for-service basis in healthcare to a value-based or case rate-based payment methodology, the managed care organizations in CanCare are doing exactly what they were developed to do, and that is reduce the Medicaid expenditures. At the end of that day, we are one of the providers who is seeing a reduction in the Medicaid revenue and the services that are being funded through the managed care organizations. That was part of the impetus that led to the closing of Frank's and some of the other reductions that we had here in February. We're all very aware of the budget constraints in Topeka. just since last July, with the elimination of 2 programs, we saw a reduction of over $1 million of revenue. And that actually is profit or margin to us that helped fund some of the other services that we provide. And it's just continuing to be a challenging environment, but we are up to it. But I think it's important for the commission to understand that we are in a transition time in funding, not only at the mental health center, but in healthcare across the country, which you might very well be aware of. Our local support, we are very grateful for the continued support from the commission. This year, we have allocated to us by the commission a little over $536,000. Just for your information, that comes to $3.35 per capita compared to the state average of a little over $7, which does put us in the bottom 10% of the community mental health centers in their county support, and roughly $100,000 less than 10 years ago. A couple things, and then I am concluding my presentation, and we'll take any questions that you have. April 7th, next week, we are having our 2nd anniversary of RSI. If any of you, again, are free and able to come, we would love to have you there. It's at 10 o'clock. And then also on May 20th, RSI and Wyandotte Center and the Kansas City, Kansas Police Department will receive the Philanthropic Award for Collaboration from Nonprofit Connect, which, if you're not familiar with that organization, they work with nonprofits throughout the metropolitan area and recognize outstanding service and outstanding work. And we are very proud, and you should be very proud of the police department for their collaboration in RSI and the recognition from the Nonprofit Connect. And with that, I will conclude and take any questions.
Randy, I'm curious about the organizational structure. Could you, you work for a board, am I correct?
Yes, sir. We actually have 5 boards. Wyandotte Inc. board is made up of representatives of the 4 subsidiary organizations, but Wyandotte Center, PACES, Kim Wilson, and RSI also have their own independent boards.
Are there overlapping directorships?
Yes, we have board members on a couple of the different boards, and then again, Wyandotte Inc. is made up of the members of the other boards.
Could you supply us a copy of that we get that?
Of the board members themselves?
Yes, board members of the Wyandotte Inc. and the 4 subsidiaries.
Absolutely, I'd be happy to do that.
Commissioner McGee?
Thank you very much. Randy, I just want to tell you that you and your staff do a great job, and I really appreciate all the work that you do in Wyandotte County. Thank you very much. Just for some administrative clerical work, I made some notes here. First of all, in the future, Administrator Bach, on special sessions, it would be greatly appreciated if you could put what this discussion will be about. You did announce in the public announcement, for example, that Wyandotte Mental Health was going to speak tonight and provide a presentation, but I didn't have any idea what that presentation was going to be about. So if it could be more, you know, we're just going to talk about our services and what we provide, or what specifically it is that they're going to do, it'd be helpful. And we can talk about that more at strategic planning if you want to do that instead to get more direction, but it would have just been more helpful to know what the topic is. A couple other just clarities for the record. I think there's some confusion. I did not request a special session. I simply said if you would like to present, if your goal in reaching out to the mayor's office was to make a presentation about your services, I think that should be done in special session as opposed in private. And that's just really my personal philosophy about the importance of transparency so that the community knows the kind of services you're providing. Plus, what a great opportunity to, you know, sing your praises to all the people in Wyandotte County and what Wyandotte Mental Health does. So that was really just a concern. And then I'll just reiterate for the record again, I understand financial times are difficult for everyone, but my concern was I was informed this was a financial request, and we have a process for every organization that wants to receive funding from the unified government. And particularly our mayor and commission have been adamant that we need to follow that process, and any deviation from that would show favoritism or a variety of other things. So I wanted to make it clear that we have a process and that process should be followed. So I appreciate you've done that. You can only do what you're told to do, so no blame on you at all. I'm glad it worked out the way it did. But with
I'm
that,
too.
but with that in mind, that's sort of it administratively. I do have one question. So my understanding is that Wyandotte Inc. for the past 2 or 3 years has received about $500,000 from the unified government. When I asked questions about how that money was given, was it through a grant process or how it was given, I learned that we have a mill levy that is designated to Wyandotte Inc. Administrator Bach, can you tell me, I also understand that mill levy isn't a traditional mill levy like a property tax mill levy. Can you explain how that works?
The designation of the half mil really relates back to the pre-consolidation days. I mean, I think when the county had formed their budget, they had just laid that out. Wyandotte, or
Would have been Wyandotte Mental Health Center at the
yeah,
time.
Wyandotte Mental Health Center was receiving this amount of money, and it was just a line items. They'd go through it. Now they could, as a county commission, just like you could, they would just appropriate or move that mill rate around to however was appropriate to what they were going to fund on an annual basis. As it became a unified government, it really falls into the same way for us. We designate so much of the mill that's going toward them. We match the amount of the mill to the amount of funding we're allocating. And I believe that's, so we kind of back into it from that perspective. We don't go to it and say, you get a half mil and however much half mil's worth is what you get, which I believe is how it was done under the former county commission. Under ours, we say you're getting $536,336. That equals 0.489 tenths of a mil or whatever, something like that.
So I have a question about that. So who determines how much money is designated to Wyandotte Inc.?
I don't know about Wyandotte Inc. Wyandotte Mental Health Service portion of it, is that what you're asking about?
Well, I think I read this. What's the
Wyandotte Center is, yeah, Wyandotte Center is who we fund.
Right, but there's a legal connection between Wyandotte Inc. and all these subsidiary organizations, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So, then how much money, who determines how much money is provided to Wyandotte Center?
Overall, I don't know. We determine how much money we're going to give Wyandotte Center.
That's what I'm asking you. In regard to the mill levy and how much money the unified government is providing to Wyandotte Center, who determines how much money is provided to Wyandotte Center from the unified government?
Ultimately, you do, Commissioner. I mean,
Could you
it's
be-
done
please-
from a perspective that we have a base budget's built in. I recommend it in my budget, and it's part of the budget that we submit to you each year for approval.
So that'd be all of the commissioners and the mayor have a say about how much money is, actual cash is given to Wyandotte Center, correct?
Correct.
And then the mill levy, you set the mill levy to match whatever we, the governing body, determine as the amount of money that we're giving them, right? Correct?
I believe that's how we do it. I would look to Kathleen to reassure me, but I think I'd be hitting her a little off guard on that.
Me?
So, no,
I was like-
our new chief financial officer.
But you're required to by the statute because of the designation of the county mental health center.
Right, to fund
under the federal legislation.
Yes.
Before I ask any more, has anyone got questions? Commissioner Bynum?
I have a comment, and with the creation of CIT and the number of law enforcement that have been trained, combined with RSI, to me, those are kind of two of the most recent innovations that we've seen come from our local community mental health center. Would you say that our community in law enforcement and criminal justice is experiencing a paradigm shift as a result of just those two items? And Judge Lynch, I am looking at you because I know that you were a big part of pushing for both of those items based on what you were seeing on your docket.
Right. In 2012, we filed 149 care and treatment cases. So that's 149 people. That's at least 3 trips that your sheriff's department is using their vehicles and their overtime pay to go back down to Osawatomie and pick somebody up and bring them down to my courtroom, because we do not have videos set up. Osawatomie doesn't, it just doesn't work. Let's put it like that. So, and we bring CIT on board. It's getting geared up. Rainbow closes because of the fire chief problems, fire hazard problems. So, 2013 we file 189 cases. Then our SI opens in 2014. We have CIT trained officers, and I wanted to lower it more, but it turned out there were 175 cases filed in 2014. Anybody want to guess how many we filed this year? 102. I was really lucky because I'd said if we filed under 100, I would dance down my road, in my robe down 7th Street. So those 2 extra cases saved me. But that's a significant decline. That's a significant decline in the number of transport officers that have to go down to Osawatomie. That's a significant decline in the cost of the overtime that usually comes about, because to get down to Osawatomie and get back to my office or courtroom by 10, they have to leave before their shift actually begins, so they're paying overtime. That's 107, you know, that's a lot of people that were avoided going into the jail, that were assessed or were helped through our jail diversion, who they will say to me as they're going off to Osawatomie, hey, I've got court next week in municipal court. So instead of issuing a bench warrant, our jail diversion specialist notes that, gets with the case manager, they get with Judge Brockovich and Judge Ryan, and get the case continued until their time, till they're out of Osawatomie. They come back after getting assistance from Wyandotte Center, and actually, I know this will surprise you, Mr. Walker, but they actually are paying off their fines. And when they do, they're reported to me in an outpatient treatment order in my reviews, and they're excited about it because they know that means they're doing well and they're part of the community again. And can I chime in on PACES? Mr. Walker, you were a city attorney. I think you remember the cases where the officers would get called out and they'd be holding a piece of paper that was a parenting plan, and Dad was saying, I've got visitation, and Mom's going, no, it's next week, it's not this week, he's just trying to take the kids from me because I had something special planned. Switch the genders however you want. It happened all the time. With our PACES, Supervised Visitation Exchange Center, and the PFAs, the Protection from Abuse, for those of you who don't know the lingo, that has stopped. Officers are no longer having to be lawyers and judges out on the street, and they can get back to doing their job as law enforcement officers. I've heard from many of the officers that they absolutely love that service. The great thing is, too, that we now have supervised visitation for parents to maintain the relationship with their child during a very high conflict situation, which is good for all kids. Everything I read says they need 2 parents. But we were doing that in the courthouse, in the domestic court service office, and where this whole idea came from was the day my courtroom was disrupted because a little boy saw the individual who had abused him, or actually abused his mother, ran through my courtroom and hid under one of the pews that serves as chairs in my courtroom. And we had to, and that was our supervised visitation. And it was only during the hours of 8 and 5. So fathers and mothers that were working very hard or working lots of jobs couldn't see their kids because there was no other service available. So it's not only is it great for law enforcement, it's great for the people that use the service, but it's also great for our community, because if those families can use some of the programs like the kids involved in divorce and separation through PACES, or higher conflict parenting classes, they get back to being productive citizens, and the kids do well, which means less problems for the kids in the future.
I just want to say something, if you don't mind. Yes, I get a lot of feedback from my patient base who have those issues, and the parents have to exchange children. And there's a lot of times where the women and the men will say, I'm so happy that service is available because I didn't want to show up at the front door and have somebody, run me out of the parking lot or whatever with a baseball bat, or I didn't want to get beat up when I went to pick my kids up, that sort of thing. So I have to tell you, it has been a blessing, I know, for my patients that tell me about this. Thank you.
Mr. Townsend?
Thank you. Just want to make a statement that I appreciated the overall presentation today. I had seen in the last several years that I've been on the commission this move toward decriminalizing mental illness. And I'm glad to have heard this overall picture tonight, and that the Pace's House is going well, Roberts Place. And I think this is just so needed in the community. Mr. Cousin, just for the record, have you introduced the young lady to your right, for the record?
No. In fact, I had that thought that I was negligent to do that, and so I apologize to Ms. Sawyer. This is Sharon Sawyer. She is Executive Director of RSI, and I must say, in the 2 years of its existence, she's just done an amazing job in developing that program.
Thank you.
I'll close this part of the meeting with a couple of questions from Mr. Clark. And maybe you, Randy, can assist him. I'm always interested in data. I'm interested in the source of the data for the program services at 84 and support services at 16. Is that a self-audit, an outside audit, independent audit?
I'm sorry, can you repeat
I want to
what
know
you're
the
referring?
source of the audit that determines how much you spend on administration versus actual service.
That is actually just taken directly from the budget in terms of.
budget?
Yes. And
Sorry. Apparently, if you don't talk like this, they can't record it in our sophisticated system. Pardon me. Go ahead.
yeah, those the 84%, that number is taken from the salaries and the costs directly associated with the employees that are providing direct care and service to our consumers. The 16% is the overhead administrative cost.
I'd also like to ask that we determine I know that you have $3.50. I'm not sure what page that was on, per capita, and that it's one of the lowest in the state. I would also wonder what some of our counties with, 5, 4, 3, 2,000, what do they spend? It wouldn't take a lot of money for them to be spending $7 or $8 per capita and still not have as good a services as we have. So I'd like to see that comparative data with counties,
Sure.
other urban counties.
Sure.
Where we get a better sense of if we're good or bad.
Absolutely. We have that information,
sure you
and
do.
I'll be happy to share that with the commission.
I also want to thank you for the presentation. It was very helpful, and there's a lot of information here to digest. Yes.
If I could just clarify one thing, the funding that goes to Wyandotte Inc. is all taken from management agreements with the subsidiary organizations. So the money allocated from the commission goes directly to Wyandotte Center, and it goes to fund the positions providing direct care and direct service to those who are uninsured. The monies taken from Wyandotte Center and Paces as management agreements come from the fee for services that we generate, again, primarily from the Medicaid billings.
Okay, final question, Commissioner McGee.
It's really not a question, it's just a comment. Randy, the reason I asked that, and I think you're aware, is that it's no secret that some organizations have been under extreme fire, particularly from our mayor, for making sure that they do not receive any funding or even the appearance of being funded. As you know, our mayor opted to almost veto our entire budget this summer because it might have appeared that I was involved with an organization that was slated to receive some funds. So I recognize that you've done your legal duty to try to separate those corporations so there is no conflict of interest with the mayor and his wife working for you. But you should know that that offer has been made from other organizations and been found not acceptable. So my goal is this: whatever the rules are in Wyandotte County, which we have a history of and a bad reputation for, is that whatever the rules are, they need to be applied equally across the board, and it should be a level playing field.
Sure.
And so my concerns are that that may not be the case. And unfortunately, a very good organization like yours, just like the other organization, doing amazing things to help some of the poorest people in our community, are being treated differently. So that's my concern. Nothing against the services you provide. I think they're amazing and you do great work. I do have one last question. Are any of your board members paid? Do they receive a check from you?
We have a board member who is an attorney who has done some legal work for the organization.
Yeah, but none of your board of directors are paid, board of
To
directors?
be on the board, no.
Okay, thank you very much.
Anyone have any further questions? Well, with that, thank you. The next item of business is that we need a motion. We have to read a formal motion. You want me to read this? Who is?
I'm more than happy to.
All right, you have it? Fine. Go right ahead.
Well, I will move that the commission go into executive session until 7 p.m. to discuss confidential matters related to pending litigation under attorney-client privilege, and to discuss confidential matters regarding strategy related to employer-employee relations, or negotiations, both of which are exceptions to the Kansas Open Meeting Act, and that staff designated by the county administrator be present to participate in those discussions.
I would recommend we reconvene in 5 minutes in the
Second.
upstairs.
There's a motion and a second.
Ninth floor conference room.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
The commission will reconvene in the open session at 7 o'clock p.m. in the commissioner chambers located in the lobby level. Thank you.